Everybody, I've had the privilege of meeting everybody at my table, and for those meeting for the first time, thank you for having me this evening. And to the discussion on the 10 Crucial Days we were having over here, I am wearing a 10 Crucial Days shirt here. This was actually custom made, but I'll talk maybe a little bit tonight why it shouldn't be the 10 Crucial Days, it actually should be the 13 Crucial Days. Because we need to include Pettico Bridge and Ironworks Hill. And for those that have knowledge of their ancestors, with this chapter, Richard Summers' battalion did fight at both Pettico Bridge and Ironworks Hill on December 21st to the 23rd of '76. And those battles, skirmishes, played a direct role in General Washington being successful at the Battle of Trenton. So despite what Princeton might say, it really is more than just 10 days. It's about 13 days. So, but tonight we can talk a little bit about that. I'm here to talk about myself, which I'm uncomfortable doing, but I'll try to keep it brief. But as Charlie introduced me and we talked about prior to this evening, I'm going to talk about my fascination with cartography and also how this relates to history and the American Revolution. It's a little bit more blurry than I was hoping, but it's okay. So I work for the American Battlefield Trust. For those is everybody in this room familiar with the Battlefield Trust? Okay, very good. So the Battlefield Trust, as we know, their main mission is preserving land affiliated. Originally, they were known as a Civil War Trust, so they were exclusively for the Civil War. Then they expanded. Now they rebranded themselves about 4 years ago. Now they're the American Battlefield Trust to incorporate Rebel War and War of 1812 sites as well. I have nothing to do with the preservation side of things. I'm strictly on the K through 12 education side of things, which has been really great because they have taken it upon themselves to divide and conquer. I develop curriculum that we put in schools. I do research. I write on every topic under the sun that covers the American Revolution. And I actually did have an opportunity in doing so to create 3 new interpretive signs. This is a site at Brandywine Battlefield in Pennsylvania. And so they still acquire land, but in the process they need historians like myself and anybody here who's interested, perhaps, to do the research and make sure that the stories we're putting together are accurate and interesting. So my tenure has been the last 4 years, 2 as the Rebel War Fellow. That is unfortunately soon coming to an end. But it's been a great ride, and I've loved every opportunity that the Trust has given me. And it's allowed me to use some of my own map skills that I've developed along the way. And as you can see here, I just put together this plan. I pitched it to my boss, and he said, "Great, we're using this." So I did that without being asked to do that, and it all worked out. So that's a good experience. Why do I have Thomas Jefferson up here? Well, I should probably go back and say that I really could care less about the American Revolution for a long time. And this is before I knew about my ancestry and my relative Leonard Knaus, who fought with the Pennsylvania Northampton County militia. He's actually an ancestor of Sebastian Knaus, who partially founded Easton, Pennsylvania. If that means anything to anybody. I didn't really care about the American Revolution for a really long time, and it was because I was 18 years old, I had a Trans Am, and I was interested in women, so you can forgive me. And, but I was always interested in history. My grandfather served in World War II, and so I naturally was interested in World War II. I was very interested in the 1960 space race throughout grade school, and just moving forward, I got back into college after years of being a failed musician, and the more I read about the American Revolution, the more I just said, wow, this is so rich and so misunderstood, and I wish I learned more about the little stories in school. And Jefferson was one of the first ins to that world, and just really diving into his personality. You know, we all know the documents and being president, but the architecture, you know, and how his mind worked, it really spoke to me, and it really drew me in for the first time like nobody from that founding period had before. And it was at this time that I was really getting into him and his architectural drafting that I went back to school. I took college serious for the first time, and I really count him to helping me, you know, kind of get my life back together in that regard and take the steps forward that I needed to be where I am today. So this is just a sketch I did in grad school when I was bored last semester, but I have it here today just to kind of, you know, bring it full circle and say, like, Jefferson's not my favorite founding father. I actually have a lot to say about Jefferson. It's probably not too kind. But at the same time, I recognize his genius, his importance, and what he meant to me on my journey. So I wanted to include him here. And so this leads me to cartography. I actually really started getting into maps about 6 years ago. And I discovered a man by the name of John Hills. Has anybody heard of John Hills? Shame on all of you. John Hills, he served with the British Army during the war. He started his career as an ensign in the 38th Regiment of Foot, and he finished it with the 23rd Regiment of Foot, the Royal Welsh Fusiliers. But there's no evidence he actually served with the 23rd ever. And the reason for that is Mr. Hills was a map maker. He was a cartographer. He was an assistant engineer. He was all of the above, whatever term you want to give him. He most certainly, though, was somebody that history has forgotten and overlooked. And the reason for this is we don't know if he had any formal training or not. Despite Hills later saying that he went to the Tower of London and the Royal Academy in Woolwich, and somehow doing both at the same time, according to him. We don't know what his training was, but he was a gifted cartographer. Anyway, I have some of his maps over here. They're on the back portion of this, and these were actually reprinted in 1976 for the bicentennial. John Hills is the only cartographer in the entire war for both armies who profiled New Jersey. And he did about 30 maps of the state of New Jersey, meaning New Jersey is the only state that has such attention paid to it in this kind. While these maps shy away from having details about battles and whatnot, they are excellent representations of the road structures and also the water structures that the British Army would see as they were marching through the state, particularly in June of '78. So for us historians, obviously, we look at these maps and say, my God, this is what New Jersey looked like in June of '78. Their accuracy, I would say, are probably about 8 out of 10. So by all means, take everything with a grain of salt because they're only going to measure and weigh what is in front of them. They had no balloons, no airplanes or whatnot. So, but they are about as accurate as we can ask for from the time period. So I did some more research on Mr. Hills. I did a couple articles, one for the Journal of American Revolution. And then I discovered one day that John Hills, his name turns up on several maps of Philadelphia. Turns out John Hills did not go back to England with the British when the war was over. He stayed in America. And he became a cartographer in the city of Philadelphia. And Philadelphia in the 1790s was known as the Athens of the West. It was the hub, the center of everything, scientific, political, economic, you name it, Philadelphia was the place to be. Obviously, that's where the first government, well, sorry New York, second place. But obviously the government was there for 10 years while DC was being built. And Hills worked for Henry Knox for several years, both in Massachusetts and also at Knox's estate in Maine. He briefly worked for George Washington when Washington was president. Hills surveyed the future site of Harper's Ferry, where they were looking to build arsenals with the lead up of a possible war with France in the 1790s. But most importantly, he did 2 maps of Philadelphia, one in 1796 and also a map in 1808. And the map in 1796 I consider is probably the most accurate map of Philadelphia of that generation. I always say if you want to see what Philadelphia looked like when Washington was president, that's the map you look for. And these can be found on the Library of Congress's website. All you have to do is go on their website, go to maps, type in John Hills, you can get this whole selection, including these right here. So I was doing this research in the hills that I really said, like, wow, like there's so, maps they really do speak to us. They tell us so much about not only the events, but also the people. In his case, obviously, I was really trying to, figure out what drove him to do maps, trying to discover his personal life, which is still, unfortunately, very elusive because there's very little documentation. But it's just trying to figure out, like, what is it about maps and just sketch drawing and all this, the visualization that draws all of our attention, And I really think there is power to that. And just, having this stuff out and just seeing the few people already that have looked at the maps tonight, and even myself looking at them for the billionth time, I always like to stop and actually try to find something new. Even though I've looked at this map 50 times, or however many times, it draws my attention to, is there something in the writing, even though I wrote it? Is there something here that maybe I overlooked, or need to look at it in a different way, or the way the mulligan is drawn out here? So it's that fascination that always draws me back. And not only that, here's one version of the Battle of Chestnut Neck. Who's to say that there's not another version that could be drawn? And what information could we possibly gain from that drawing? So it's playing around with those different aesthetics, if you will, that I really that really draws me back in every time to a new project. So here's a couple, and as I said, I'll credit Jefferson for this. Just messing around doing some architectural drawings of Mount Holly. And this one I was going to bring in person because I had a feeling everybody would really like this one. But every time I do these talks with maps, I feel like it's raining outside. And maps and rain don't go well together. So forgive me, I only brought what I brought. But this is actually a map. How many of us have seen Band of Brothers, the HBO show? If we're familiar with Band of Brothers, obviously about the 101st Airborne, the episode where they're at Battle of the Bulge and they storm the town of Foy, this depicts that engagement at Foy. I ripped this off of, there's two historians that actually give walking tours in Belgium, and they lead mostly American tourists, obviously, on a walking tour through the woods here, where the Americans and Easy Company broke through, and then the town of Foy, which they attacked. The town itself is pretty much the same as it was in 1945. It hasn't changed much. The church is still there in the center of town. But anyway, I wanted to branch out of doing just Rep War stuff. And as I said, World War II was kind of a first love of mine. And I really loved Band of Brothers, and still do. And I feel like that was the episode that was the pinnacle of the whole series. So, and to my knowledge, there is not a map depicting this, really. So I wanted to branch out and put this together. And I wrote the whole synopsis, much to the chagrin of everybody I know saying, why would you write that much text and expect us to read it all? But in case you are interested in reading it all, there it is. So.
Yeah, but the text helps to
Yes.
explain what they're looking at.
Exactly. So if that's, again, it's providing options for people. If you're not into text, and a lot of people aren't into text, you're just going to look at the imagery and say, that's great, and on your merry way. But if you're into the text because you want to get that background information, you're right, that's what it's there for. So, and here's just a close-up of what Foy looked like on the attack. I have the Panzer tank here, the church. This is the initial attack, and Lieutenant Dyke. I'm sorry if I'm throwing names out that people aren't familiar with, but if you know the episode, the Easy Company's initial CEO in the attack, he lost the will to fight halfway through the battle. He was actually wounded, which is part of the reason why he lost the will. And then they had a reinforcement, CO come in, Lieutenant Spears. He took over and then led the rest of the attack through the village. The show gets it kind of wrong for the most part, but it's a TV show, they always do that. But nonetheless, it was based off of mostly real events. And again, it just fascinated me. I was like, this has never been done before, so let me try something a little different. So going back to the Rev War, again, I've done a lot of maps on New Jersey. That's, I'm born and raised in Jersey. But I also have an affinity for the East Coast. I've been up and down the East Coast dozens of times, especially in the Carolinas. Working with the working with the Battlefield Trust, I did a whole thing. They have a thing down there called the Liberty Trail, which is basically piecing together all the different engagements in South Carolina. Despite New Jersey making the claim that we have more engagements than any two states combined, or whatever we want to say in the Rev War, South Carolina's got a good claim to telling or calling BS on our part. They have a lot of skirmishes down there, and the Liberty Trail is seeking to piece it all together. So that being said, while working on the project, I said, well, why don't I try to do something that encapsulates all this work? So that's what this project is, or this map rather, came out of, and did a close-up. This is Charleston during the siege of Charleston in May of 1780. You can see the British, this was the American blockade, but obviously it didn't work. The British ended up going around. This is the old, mind blank. The corn work. Thank God I wrote it there. See? Even I need to keep it. That's why it's there. The horn work, which was made out of oyster shells. That was actually the fortification at the north end of the Charleston Neck. Briefly slowed the British down, but obviously didn't prevent the British from taking Charleston eventually. But again, it was just a different project for me to expand what I felt comfortable doing, as opposed to doing something like this, try doing something like that. And I have tidal depths in here that I ripped off of some depth charts from the area, and just trying to create something that you normally wouldn't see. Something that, as historians, people who like history, we would find interesting and also useful. We want the accurate information. And going back to that last map with the about World War II and the Battle of Bulge, I spent 2 weeks researching what I wrote there before I wrote it down and actually drew everything. Because obviously, if I'm putting my name to something, you want it to be accurate. You don't want to present it and then, hopefully this doesn't get ripped apart this evening by all you fine people in here. But for that reason, I don't want to present something and the first thing you say is, the Mullica River does not do this. It does this. What is that? So there is research that goes into each project. But in doing so, taking it seriously, kind of taking it, presenting it almost like a profession and not just a hobby. The seriousness you put into it, hopefully it comes out when it's being presented. So, and here's another map. Unfortunately, it's a little blurry up here. I have here Cornwallis, Bannister Tarleton, Patrick Ferguson. That's Francis Marion, Sumter, Dan Morgan, and then Nathaniel Green. And this was, again, doing the exact same thing I had just done with the other map, kind of doing the outline of the coast, but just doing a timeline and showing every engagement, that major engagement that took place. So I would actually call this kind of a failed attempt at a map, and that's kind of why I put it up here. I like the depictions of the different people and the silhouette of the coast, but I don't think I was successful doing this. I think it's too busy, and it kind of loses your eye as you read it. So I probably would never do that again. But again, it's, you got to take risks with anything you do. So this I actually did plan to bring today, but I'm very about the rain. This is a map I did of Philadelphia. So this is showing Philadelphia in 1795. Philadelphia would be this. So this is north and this is east. And if it helps, here's Dock Street right here. That's Independence Hall right there. And whatnot. And I took this from several maps. One was the John Hills map. There was another map done in 1794 by A.E. Sparks, I think. And so I kind of took elements of the two. What I really was proud about this map, though, is I have two different keys here. This one shows all the buildings that I kind of highlighted here in red. So there's a key here. And on this one, I actually have a directory of all the people that I could find that I thought were interesting to know, where they were actually living at the time. And instead of just including George Washington or Robert Morris, I really tried to show how Philadelphia was a city that had everybody in it. You know, you had artisans of every shape, color, however you want to name it. You had African Americans living next door to white Americans, and I wanted to really reflect that in this. So I really tried to, like I said, I definitely picked people out that we all know, and then I was flipping through the directory and saying, this woman, that profession, and I put her on there too. So just kind of representing that the city was a city of every, you know, of many types of people, not just the famous names that we all associate with. So this shows a trajectory of the British route from June of '78 when they left Philadelphia. We all know the British were not all together, right? On the June '78 route to Monmouth, they actually divided and conquered twice. Knyphausen was with the baggage train, and Henry Clinton was with the infantry. They divided twice, and they eventually came together here. And then they obviously met Washington, or Charles Lee in the vanguard at Monmouth on the 28th, and then proceeded to abandon the state. So, this is Mount Holly, New Jersey, as it was depicted in 1776. Has anybody been to Mount Holly here? Oh, nice. Looks a lot different today. But there are some familiar sites here. This is the Mount right here. This is High Street going down here. This is the center of town. And then Ironworks Hill, where St. Andrew's Cemetery currently is. That is right here.
Is Ironworks Hill to the south of Mount Holly on that map?
So Ironworks Hill is right here, yep. And then this is the Rancocas Creek going through. And this is actually the original route of the creek. This was rerouted in the 1950s by the Army Corps of Engineers. So, but the buildings that I've marked here are historically accurate, and I know this from Mr. Hills. There's a map over here he did of Mount Holly in June of '78 when the British stayed there for 2 days, and he took the time to draw the individual houses in town. So I replicated his placement of all the houses, and using original documents from early 19th century historians that luckily went back and did the research for us. Now, we know that as here, there was a tavern on the very outskirts of town up north. This was Isaac Hazelhurst estate on Clover Hill, Rancocas Valley Regional High School, and Mount Holly is currently located on Clover Hill. That's that hillside that's on the front lawn there. Isaac Hazelhurst, great story about him. We know Stephen Girard. Has anybody heard of him from Philadelphia? He was probably the wealthiest American at the time of his death in 1838. Him and Hazelhurst were both merchants in the latter half of the 18th century. And anyway, Hazelhurst bought this property on December 25th, 1776. The day before the Battle of Trenton. And he built a mansion there, and on June 20th, 1778, the entire British Army comes and descends on Mount Holly. So Hazelhurst, apparently, according to his daughter, they took all the pewter dishes and china and whatnot, they buried it in the yard. And Lord Cornwallis himself ends up taking quarters at the mansion. And the story goes that that evening, they're all having claret and they're all drinking wine and whatnot. And the British officers are surrounded by Hazelhurst's family, most likely against their will, you know. And the British are toasting King George and toasting the march and the success of getting to Sandy Hook unmolested. And so they toasted King George. and Hazelhurst's 5-year-old grandson walks into the room. And Lord Cornwallis turns around, he takes the boy, he puts him on his knee, and he goes, "And you, sir, who shall we toast to next?" And he goes, "Why, we should toast to George Washington. Long live General Washington." And Cornwallis thought it was hilarious, and they all said, "To General Washington." So there you go. Spunky little 5-year-old. Hazelhurst actually also has a really cool quick story about him as well. His daughter, Mary, in 1798, she married Benjamin Latrobe. And Benjamin Henry Latrobe would design the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. And some of their children are actually buried at St. Andrew Cemetery in Mount Holly, so, as well as Isaac Hazelhurst. So, full circle, it's, you know, these people, they have ties to our communities, and we sometimes overlook it, but it's pretty cool when you read back or go back into the records and some of the historians from a century past, you know, some of the stories they tell, yeah, they're a little far-fetched, but some of them are actually based on, you know, strong kernels of truth, and they're pretty cool. So, another rendition of Mount Holly I did, same point, but obviously a completely different depiction. Here, again, here's the mount. This is showing the December '76 engagement. This would be the Hessians under von Dunout. His artillery was placed on the mount. This is showing the Americans retreating. Again, it's a little blurry, so forgive me. But I went out of my way here to not only show where the houses were, but actually now this time I'm listing last names of people. So I also hear this is Irishtown. This little neighborhood in Mount Holly was referred to as Irishtown at the time. This was Whitehall. You know, and it's just pulling those details out of the history books and then adding it to maps like this, it reintroduces it to everybody currently. And in my opinion, I mean, that's what we should be doing if we can do it, beyond just talking about George Washington or talking about battles and whatnot. You'd be surprised when I introduce stuff like this to people I meet all the time, whether it's at farm fairs or public programming like this or similar. It's usually these types of renditions and stories that really draw people's attention after the fact. I usually get the most questions about this kind of stuff. And that's how I know, like, going forward, like, continuing doing these kind of projects is worthwhile, because I feel like so few people are doing them. They're just as important along with the bigger, more well-known projects. So pivoting a little bit here, as Charlie mentioned, I'm Vice President of the Red War Alliance of Burlington County. We're a non-profit 501(c), and we've been together for a few years. Like everybody, the pandemic slowed us down tremendously for 2 years. But we were very successful in building a brand new monument at Ironworks Hill, depicting and telling the story of what took place there in December of '76. And it all started with this drawing that I came up with. And we had some ideas for what we wanted to do. Right now there's just a single, originally there was a stone that was put there in '76 with a flag to commemorate the story, and we felt that the site deserved an upgrade, it deserved better. So we put together this conception, we presented it to St. Andrew Cemetery, or rather church, who owned the cemetery, and they said, great, how are we going to fund this thing? So I came up with the idea of doing a GoFundMe, and we set a target goal of $5,000, and we blasted it out on the internet, and we raised $5,000. And we got donations from all across the country. One lady from Virginia, who I've met several times now, she's wonderful. She cut us a check for $1,000. And she just said, I have a ton of money, I'm still alive, and I don't know what to do with it. And I just said, you're my new best friend. And she said, you know, she goes, Monticello, Mount Vernon, they don't need my money. They have plenty of money. She said, small organizations like yourselves who need money, that's who I'm interested in helping. So she was a great person to find and meet and whatnot. So with the generous help of several people, we were able to do phase 1 of this conception, which we put together and dedicated last December. This is us right after we built all of the snake rail fencing, and we put gravel stone in. And this is, apologies for the blurriness. This is us in December dedicating the site along with the SAR color guard was present. Also, we had representatives from both the Democratic and Republican parties there, which I love pointing out because it has to be said. We all know what's going on in the world today. We all know, we all feel it, and I just love the fact that, in my experience personally, I have had nothing but very positive interactions and feedback with elected officials from both political parties. And I know these are local elected officials. They are different. They are a different breed and animal than federal elected officials. But there has never been an instance where I felt like they were shining me on, that I was wasting their time, that this was not, this was not a conversation that they were unwilling to have with me. And we have already set plans to work on future projects together. And I think that's just the way, the way this needs to operate the best we can. I tell people all the time, like everybody, I have my personal politics and beliefs, but I try to check that at the door as much as I can. And when I speak to elected officials who I haven't met before, one of the first things I say is, we're not a political group. We're not about that. We're just about trying to tell the stories in a way that's accessible to as many people as possible. And with that in mind, again, it's very hard for anybody to resist and say, no, we're against what you're doing. So I think that's very important, as I said, with what's going on in the world today. I want to be an example for other groups that there is far more commonality amongst everybody than not. So. And then lastly, our website is redwaralliance.org. It's a work in progress, so bear with me if the website looks like it's from 2000. We're still building it out. But you can find us on Facebook at Red War Alliance in Burlington County. Please ask that you do that. And then lastly, some initiatives that we're putting in place in the coming months. Our big initiative right now is Pettico Bridge in Mansfield Township. Again, I don't know firsthand whose ancestors were involved in the Summers Battalion, but they were in the thick of it with the 42nd Scott Highlanders and also detachments of the Hessian Jaeger Company and a couple of the other detachments there. And Pettico Bridge is, the more I read about it, the more I really become invested in it. It really was kind of a standing point. This is where the Hessians under von Donau, this was his southern outpost. And does everybody know who I'm talking about when I say Colonel von Donau?
Yeah. We sponsored an essay that the Historical Society published, and the presentation's been given many times in Stockton and other places.
Wonderful.
On the whole Princeton-Trenton continuum.
Yeah.
And we saw it as actually starting at Pettico Bridge, backing up to Iron Hill.
Yeah.
But then, after that occurs,
Right.
doing an end run around the left side of the line,
Okay.
and coming up again from Trenton, almost to Trenton 1, but definitely Trenton 2 and Princeton.
You mean von Donau?
Yeah, well, the Summers Battalion.
Oh, yeah,
That's
they come
what
up.
we were tracking. We have
Gotcha.
30 pension applications from the Summers Battalion. More than have survived from almost all of South Jersey put together.
Yeah.
And they tell it pretty accurately.
I was going to say, I'm actually writing a book on all of this, and I have those 30 pension applications.
They're wonderful.
Yeah, they are. But I also have to remember that this was 50 years removed, so unfortunately.
But you want to know something?
But they all kind of tell the same stories, so that's where the accuracy
They
kicks
do.
in.
I did
Yeah.
a lot of research, and I taught an ancient language, so I was doing ancient research.
Right.
And the consensus in those pension applications
Yeah.
is higher then you have to go all the way into the early 1900s to get a more exacting thing.
Sure.
And there was nothing in there other than a flip-flop of sequence,
right.
which, again, you're dealing with 70, 80-year-old minds.
Right.
Yeah, but boy, the detail.
They were there. There was no disputing that. They were definitely there. So, Pettico Bridge at the moment is in danger of being developed. It's a 197-acre plot of land that is currently designated for low-income housing development in Mansfield Township. And we have tried on numerous occasions to work with Mansfield and also the developer to potentially save a portion of the property, recognize it, interpret it. Thus far, it has been unsuccessful. Roger Williams and I, at the state level, with your permission, sir, we have coordinated with the DAR and also the Battlefield Trust, and we're putting together a contingency plan to make a proposal. And the proposal is to seek, somebody mentioned it earlier, the funds that were appropriated this past year for Red War-related sites in rather than the state. It's $25 million that was appropriated. Now we know that most of that money is probably going to go to Monmouth, Princeton, Red Bank, Trenton, but our point to our local officials is, what are you doing to try to get some of that money for local sites like Pettico Bridge? So that being said, I'm currently in works to talk with the mayor of Mansfield once again, and we're setting up a date with the Battlefield Trust as the host to host a developer on site, give them the history, and say, this is what we want to do. And as we've said from day one, we're not against development. It's not our business. It's private property. The township has a need. They can do with it whatever they'd like to do. But we just feel, given the history of the site, given that Burlington County has this many battlefields at the moment, and the rare chance that we actually have a known battle site, and how, as we're all acknowledging how important it really was, we really feel that this is an opportunity that we cannot let go. So even if it's 5 acres, we'd be happy with that. But the good news is they've owned this property since 1992, and they haven't done anything with it yet. So perhaps we buy 5 acres now and say, when you're willing to sell the other 190 acres, give us a call. We'll find the money. But that would be incredible if we could have a site that size, because then if any of our chapters needed a site to do reenactments on, like full-scale battle site, we would have it. And it would be open to that, for that use. So I'll certainly keep everybody in the know as that develops. Mount Holly's going to have an Ironworks Hill Day this December 10th. We're going to have 2 programs. One is going to be in the morning. It's going to be a brief program. We're unveiling new interpretive signs at Pettico Bridge that I designed. And we're also going to do a program in the afternoon at St. Andrews Cemetery at Ironworks Hill. That's going to be from 3 to 4. And all are welcome to that as well. Rogers Mill in West Hampton Township. Has anybody heard of Rogers Mill before? So Rogers Mill was the site of the plantation owned by William Rogers. It was burned by the British on June 21st, 1778, when they were pulling out of Mount Holly. Rogers was suspected of being a Patriot ally, and the British, they didn't like that too much. So they burned his house and mill down, but the ruins and foundation are still intact. And they are currently located in the Rancocas Nature Center in West Hampton Township. We've been given permission by the Nature Center to interpret the site. So we're looking to secure a grant in order to establish interpretive signs and also build on the existing park trails there. So just kind of include it in the existing trails and whatnot. And then June 2023, we're going to have a new program in Mount Holly, but that is to be determined. And the last 3 points are kind of tying that last bullet point on the 23rd into everything is, I'm very grateful to be here this evening. I certainly come as a fellow member of the SAR. But I'm also kind of coming hand in hand. If there's any reenactment groups that you guys are associated with or familiar with, anybody that would be willing to work with us in Mount Holly and Burlington County, please get in contact with me. I have business cards and whatnot. Mount Holly, we're finding out as of recently, Mount Holly's kind of took on a reputation in the last few years, last 15 years of kind of not being the best with organizing for Ironworks Hill Day, and we're really trying to turn that around, especially post-pandemic. And with the 250th a few years away, we really want to reintroduce Mount Holly's importance. So if there's any groups or any way you think that people can be supportive of us, please contact. If you have any ideas for programming, I'm always open for that. And also, if you know anybody who has artifacts or collects artifacts that would be interested in selling artifacts, our group has money as a nonprofit that is looking to acquire artifacts specifically for interpretation and programming. So yes, all the above. That is it.
Anybody have any
Questions?
Questions or?
So do you either sell the originals or prints of your
I get that every time. When grad school is over, yes, that is going to be my primary focus, is getting these printed to sell. The difficulty I've come by so far is finding the precise means, the appropriate means of printing these and then mass producing them in order to sell. I know they exist, obviously. It's just kind of finding the right print shop that works for this. So again, if anybody knows anybody, I'm open to listening. But yes, these maps, some of the other ones, I would definitely be open to selling, and obviously future works. So.
Did you do commissions or?
Absolutely. When I was introduced to the mayor of Princeton at the dinner, I actually offered him. I said, if you ever need me for a commission, and he actually was interested. So,
I don't know if I was the first one to ask you for a copy from just a net,
Yeah.
but I get number one copy, please. Any other questions?
A comment was just made.
yes.
We have a couple friends at Stockton that we work with here very closely in the Atlantic County Historical Society, Paul Shop and Thompson Sullivan.
Oh, terrible people.
Yeah,
Doing very well.
but they are doing a great job with the Stockton Print Shop
Okay.
in publishing their Sojourn Journal.
Yep.
And a lot of this, I just finished going through an editing process with them on an article based on the late 1890s. And Tom has developed some ways of sharpening things up that are fuzzy, that are, to me, phenomenal. I mean, and you know Paul, I'm sure well. Yeah, I just think that they would be, you might want to contact them and talk to them about it. You may short circuit your search.
It's always possible. It's usually that way, right? It's a lot
Some
closer than you thought.
Saying it comes up last.
Yeah. Any
Anything
other
else?
questions?
Adam, thank you very much
You got it.
for taking the time to come down. Please, before you leave tonight,